So drawing on evidence from countries in South Asia, India and Pakistan, as well as East Africa, in Tanzania, Kenya and Uganda, we find very strong evidence that it's the poorest children who are least likely to be learning. Some of these children are not learning because they're not in school, and others are not learning because they're spending time in school and not actually achieving anything. So in some of these countries, it's no more than 10% of children from poorest backgrounds who are learning the basics in literacy and numeracy. In rural India and Pakistan using ASA data, and in Tanzania, Kenya and Uganda using UESO data, we find that the gaps in learning start at the point or even before children start school. So we already find that there are gaps between the richest and the poorest children at the point of entry in school. But also we find that these gaps widen over the school cycle. So by the time children have reached grade 5, after 5 years in school, the gaps are far wider between the richest and the poorest children. The wealth gaps are far more dominant than other gaps, for example, gender gaps, which vary quite a lot across the different countries. So from the evidence, we find there are 5 strategies that can help to narrow gaps in learning from children from disadvantaged backgrounds. The first step is that we really need to even start interventions before children start in primary school. So preschool and early childhood development programs can have big effects on children's learning overall, but are also narrowing those gaps. The second step is to make sure that the curriculum keeps pace with children who are from disadvantaged backgrounds. Too often curricula are set at levels which are for the highest achieving learners, and so you have children who are just sitting in classrooms unable to keep up and left behind and either drop out or just sitting there quietly and not learning. The third step is to make sure that teachers, the best teachers, are deployed to areas where they're needed the most, so that disadvantaged learners have access to the best teaching. The fourth step is to make sure that learning materials are available, but it's not just enough to have those learning materials available. They also need to be in the right language, at the right pace, and also teachers need to be trained in using them. So some evidence shows that learning materials don't make any difference. The reason why they don't make any difference is often because they're not set at the right pace, or they're in the wrong language, or teachers don't know how to use them. So it's a combination of factors that is needed. And then the final strategy is, for those different interventions to work, we need to make sure that parents and communities are empowered to hold schools to account for ensuring that children are learning and that these interventions are being properly implemented. This happens often through school management committees and parent-teacher associations, but too often the disadvantaged are voiceless within these committees. So we need to make sure that these groups who are from the disadvantaged backgrounds also are part of the decision-making process and have access to information that can help to improve their children's learning. So we need to make sure that we are tracking progress over these 15 years from 2015 to 2030 by, first of all, disaggregating data by different groups and making sure that we're tracking progress for the most disadvantaged group and identifying the extent to which they are making progress over time. The Millennium Development Goals made the mistake of just looking at averages and tracking progress of the overall population, and that meant that some children might have been making progress, but the most disadvantaged might not have been, and we didn't know they were hidden. So we really need to make that transparent and visible. We need to also make sure that we are tracking progress of learning for both children in school and out of school, and this is where the ASA and UESO data can provide us with experience and learning, because they are based in the household. They collect information on children's learning from the household, which enables us to track progress of both those sets of children, whether they're in school or out of school. We also need to not only have our sights on 2030, but we need to look at interim targets, stepping stone targets, as Kevin Watkins has called them, to make sure that disadvantaged children are making progress within a shorter period of time, so that we're not just waiting until 15 years' time to find out that they haven't achieved anything and it's too late to do anything about it. So a lot of countries at the moment have some form of national assessment, some form of data that can provide some information on learning, but too often it doesn't include children out of school. Too often it doesn't provide us with disaggregated data for children from different backgrounds to be able to understand who it is that is learning and who isn't learning. And too often it's not possible to actually track progress of children over time. So from our sort of experience of the analysis that we've done with the data available, we would advocate that we need household-based surveys that include children in school and out of school, that include information on their socioeconomic status and other background characteristics, ideally also information on whether or not they have a disability, which often data sets have no information on whatsoever, and ideally also longitudinal data that allows us to track progress of cohorts of children over time. There are countries that have such data, but in the poorest countries this is often very rare. It's obviously expensive to collect, so we need to look at how this can be achieved within the resources that are available. But if we are to make progress over the next 15 years and know whether we're making progress, we do need to also invest far more in data than has been the case up until now, and particularly data on learning.